Okay, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. This week's webinar for Abacus Law is titled Mastering Case Creation in Abacus Law. So this is a good one. My name is Scott Heiss, Senior Trainer for Abacus Next. Do me a favor, just like we always do on our webinars. If you can see my screen okay, please just click the little hand raising button there on your GoToMeeting window so I can make sure. Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and put your hands down, and I'll assume that you can all hear me okay since you followed those instructions. So yeah, mastering case creation in Abacus Law. Really what we're trying to do here is break the habit of using the old way, and I'll explain what the old way is here in a sec, of creating, case-related records. We're trying to break people out of that old habit and really get them understanding the proper intake process, okay, which includes the use of a single intake form. So that's what we're going to focus on mainly today, and we'll dive into some detailed stuff. And of course, we'll take your questions as well. So make sure you are typing your questions into the little questions box as they pop into your brain. I will do my best to get all of them answered on the webinar today. But look, if I don't answer your question, it's okay. I'm going to follow up with you via email, or if it's something that I think is, really requires some attention, I'll probably give you a call. So, nothing is off limits when it comes to questions. Throw them in the question box there, and I will do my best to get you taken care of. If I don't answer your question, though, don't worry. I'll follow up with you after the session. So let's talk about the old way, okay? And again, when we're talking about case creation kind of encompasses a few things. We say case creation, but really what you're doing is you're taking a bunch of, case-related records, and you're kind of, you're putting them together, right? You're putting them in a relationship. So you have, like your master matter record, and then you have your client's name record, and then you have your client's, maybe their spouse. Then maybe you have, maybe you have a defendant in the case, right? An opposing party. And then maybe that opposing party has opposing counsel, right? Or, so on and so forth. So, for every matter that you take on at your law firm, you could have, tons of different name records that are all associated with that case that you need to create records for as well. And then in turn, they all have to be linked together, right? The reason we want them linked together, one is for efficiency and just having a clean, organized database. That's the key, right? When the attorney says to me, hey, who was, the expert witness on the whatever case, I want to make it easy for me to find that information, right? So if we're linking all of our cases or all of our records together properly, that's very easy to do. In addition to that, form generation is a big part of our day in the legal world, right? We're submitting court forms. We are submitting letters to our clients and to opposing parties and things like that. So being able to do proper, form automation and form generation all stems from having the correct data in your matter records and having the correct record links associated with each of those cases as well, okay? So I guess the point I'm trying to get at here is in order to be successful in the end, right, in order to complete your case project successfully, you have to start correctly, right? You never want to start anything off on the wrong foot because then that usually leads to just a, bad momentum, right? So if you can start an efficient and accurate case creation, you're starting off on the right foot, and, things are usually pretty smooth from there, okay? So let's talk about the old way. Okay, for all of our users out there who have used Abacus, for quite some time before we really started, highlighting the intake forms, you may have been creating your records by going directly into the appropriate databases. Okay, like for instance, we have a names database here. Okay, and that names database lists all of our contacts, every contact that the firm has. And in the bottom of that little names database, we've got an add button. And that's how we can add a contact to our names database. So back in the day, if you needed to add a client or something, you would go into this database and you'd click that add button and you'd run through the process of adding that person to your names database. And then when it was time to add the case, you would go into the matters database, and that would open up all of your list of cases, and you would click the add button, and that would run you through a process of adding the case-specific information for the matter record. And then it was kind of on you to make sure that there was a relationship link created between those name records that you manually added and the matter record that you manually added. So anybody who's looking at this program or has, if you're brand new to it and you're just kind of snooping around in the system, one of the things you may notice inside of your cases, let me open up just a very basic dissolution here. So I'll open up just your standard divorce case here. Every matter record has a tab, it's tab number 3, and it's called linked names. Okay, so whenever you look at linked names, that shows a list of all of those name records that are somehow associated with this matter. So you have your client, you have the respondent, you could have witnesses, you could have doctors, you could have children, beneficiaries, whatever it may be. But anything you see in this tab is a name record. It's a name record that lives in this names database. So if you're following the old school way of going into the names database and adding your records manually, and then going into the matters database and adding your matter manually, you have to remember to then go into that matter record and start adding links. Okay, see that little add link button down at the bottom? This is where you have to click and you have to choose all of those name records that you just created, and you have to select them from your names database, and you have to add, basically give them like a relationship type, a relationship type of, witness or client or something like that. Okay. So when we do it that old way, what are we doing? We're doing a lot of clicks. It's a lot of different places in the program that we have to go to. Okay, we got to go into one database, and we got to, repeat a bunch of processes to add all of our, contacts with the case. Then we got to go into the matters database. Then we got to click into the relationships and form all those. It's a lot of clicks. And with the more clicks, the more room for human error, right? And that's what we're trying to eliminate, because we want everything to be smooth when it's all said and done. So we got to start smooth, and we got to start efficiently. That is the purpose of the intake form. Okay, so if you are currently adding your case records the old way, you're not technically wrong. You're just not doing it in the most efficient manner. So what I'd like everybody to start trying is using the intake forms. Okay, that's why we have this little intake button on our intake, or on our toolbar rather. Okay, now the cool thing about intake forms for people that, for anybody who hasn't ever used them or seen them, is you can have an intake form for every single scenario. Okay, so if you're a law firm that just kind of covers all kinds of different arenas, maybe I do family law that includes adoption and divorce, and I don't know, maybe I do mediation. And then, on top of that, we've got an attorney in the firm who does, I don't know, a little estate planning or something, right? He's doing like will and trust. He's doing probate stuff. Those are obviously two completely different arenas, right? 3 or 4 different, really completely, different arenas there. So you can have intake forms for each one of those scenarios. When you take on a new divorce case, well, then you choose the divorce case intake form. Okay, when you take on that new bankruptcy case, then you choose one of the new bankruptcy intake forms. Okay, so whether you have the just the generic AbacusLaw program, or if you've also purchased the add-on practice area solutions as well, your little menu of available intake forms could vary. It's not going to look the same as mine, but it will be a variation of something similar to mine. You can see that I have tons of different intake forms in mine, right? One for pretty much every different scenario. And you can too. You can too. You just got to learn the program and learn how to do it. We'll talk a little bit about that today. So you're not going to be an expert after today. That's not the purpose. The purpose is just to get you started and get you understanding. Okay. So we want to really focus on intake. So if you've never tried intake, take the leap, try it out on your next matter, or even create a little test matter if you'd like. Okay. So let's say I'm doing a new, we'll say, what's a simple one? We'll just say it's a new civil case. Okay. Nothing too crazy. We'll say it's a new civil case and we're representing the plaintiff. Okay. In this particular matter. So that's the intake form that I'm going to choose from my list. Okay. What that's going to do is it's going to open up one single window. Remember, I said we want to get away from having to bounce around the different areas in the program to get our records created. So the intake form minimizes the windows that you have to use. It breaks it down into one. Okay. The very first section of your intake form usually always has to do with matter-specific info, okay? Like, what is the name of the matter? What's the court case number? What court is it in? What date is it opened with the firm? Who's the assigned attorney? Who's the paralegal? Things that are matter-specific, okay? Now, every intake form is going to look a little different because, remember, I said, they're kind of based off of the practice area. And of course, you can tweak them yourselves. You can edit them. Which we do a whole separate training on. But the very first section usually always has to do with matter info. So whatever you put in that first section, that is what's going to get utilized to create the matter record. Okay. And then as you scroll down, you come to these different sections. You can see here, there's a little notes section here where you can put in the date the complaint was filed, right? This is a civil case, so that's why it's asking for that. And then maybe some notes about the complaint. These are notes that are going to be attached to the matter record. Okay, they're going to be logged inside of that matter record for you immediately when you save and you create these records based off this intake form. That's great if you're a law firm that has maybe a member of the legal staff doing the intake process. And then by the time it gets to the attorney, we already want the records created. So this is really good for the attorney because by the time they get into the matter, they're already going to have the notes right in there. Okay, they're going to be able to see that, review it, and know what's going on. Okay, but as you scroll down, you come to some other sections. Notice this one here that says, please enter contact information for the client, aka the plaintiff. That's just letting us know that our client happens to be the plaintiff, just in case we also do defense work. All right. And then in this section, what we're filling in is personal information about our client, about their name, their date of birth, their social, their address, their phone number, things like that. Okay. Notice here there's a little button that says use existing name. You probably saw that up at the very top too, where it said use existing matter. These buttons are here on the intake form just in case you happen to already have a record for that particular client, okay? So let's say, we represented John Doe a year ago in his car accident case, okay? And now he's coming back to us in some sort of separate, completely different lawsuit, okay? Well, if that's the case, we can just click use existing name and we can choose Mr. Doe's name from our names database. That will save us some typing time because we won't need to, type out all of his information again. And even more importantly, that will prevent us from duplicating John Doe's name record. Okay? That's very important in a database. We don't want duplicate data for the same thing. Okay? That's very unorganized. Okay. Now, of course, you're not going to remember every single client that you've represented in the life of your firm. Maybe some of you will, probably a lot smarter than me, so I'm sure you probably could. But for me, I need a little help. So the intake form does duplication checking for you, okay? If I type in a name that already exists in my system and I try and move on, my intake form catches that. Okay, it says this name is already listed do you want to allow a new client with the same name? So this is kind of like it's kind of like just a stop, right? It's just stopping me. It's making me slow down, and it's making me think, okay, did we already represent this person before? Why would this person already be in our system? And at this point, I can say no, don't allow a new client with the same name, and then I can go check my existing names to see if this guy's already in here. It's possible that maybe it's just a person with the exact same name, right? Could be two different people, just happen to have the same name, right? There's a lot of John Smiths out there, right? So if that's the case, if it happens to be a different person with just the same name, then again, just click the yes button here. Yes, we are allowing a new client with the same name, okay? And then, of course, we're going to fill in all of that personal data about that client, phone number, address, all that good stuff. Whatever you enter into here gets used to create that client's name record. Okay, so the first section of our intake form is what gets used to create our matter record. That second big section is what gets used to create the name record for our client. And if we look even further, here's a name section for the defendant's information, okay, for the opposing party's info. So I can put name info in there for our opposing party. Okay, so I'll put in, Sally Smith, whatever it may be. Same rules apply. I can use an existing name. It will also check for duplicates when I put a name in there. Okay, and then whatever gets put into that section gets used to create the name record for the defendant in the case. Okay, keep scrolling down. Here's a section for opposing counsel, right? So anything I put in here gets used to create the name record for opposing counsel. So with this simple intake form, one single form that we can knock out pretty quick, we have one record for our matter, a second record here for our name, a third record, or for our client rather, a third record for our defendant, and a fourth record for opposing counsel, and we didn't have to bounce around anywhere. It's all done right here. And in addition to that, we were also able to put in a couple notes about the complaint and maybe a few more notes here about the case background, okay, or maybe any special handling instructions, okay? So that's quite a few records that get created. And then the nice thing is, on top of that, the system links them all together, okay? You don't have to do any of that relationship linking. The program understands, the intake form, I should say, understands that anything you put in this section is going to create a name record for your client, and it's going to link that person to the matter record as client, okay? This person is going to get linked to that matter record as the defendant. This attorney who's representing the defendant is going to get linked to the matter as opposing counsel, all right? So it does all that for you, is the point. And it's very, very efficient to do it this way, all right? Now, again, you have to keep in mind, if you have our specialty versions, like let's say, you purchased AbacusLaw, and because you do personal injury work, you also purchase the personal injury specialty version, okay? If you did, something like that, same thing for like divorce or, bankruptcy or estate planning, whatever. If you did that, then you should have intake forms that are specific to those practice areas, okay? So let me show you a different one. Excuse me. Under intake, we have personal injury, and we have a few different intake forms for personal injury. We'll say, since, a lot of the time personal injury cases usually have to do with vehicle accidents, we'll say we want to use that intake form, personal injury vehicle accident. Look at how detailed this intake form is. That's a lot of fields. See all that? We've got fields in here for our client's insurance information. We've got fields in here for defendant's insurance information, or whoever, okay, opposing parties information. We've got fields in here for insurance company information, insurance adjuster information. So when you use intake forms like this that are extremely detailed, you're creating even more records, okay, at one time. without having to go to each and every database and, link them all manually. You can see here I've got a section that says, please enter client information. And then right below that, it says, enter information about the client's insurance company. And this is where I'm going to say Geico Insurance and, the adjuster's name. And then I've got defendant's personal information. And then I've got a section for defendant's insurance company. Each one of these is a new name record that's getting linked to the matter with the appropriate relationship type. Okay? So what I recommend to all of you is first, see what intake forms you have. Okay, that's step number one. You got to know what you have before you know where you can go. So hit your intake button there on the toolbar and take a look. Okay, do you have any that are specific to practice areas like estate planning or bankruptcy or immigration? If you have things like that, then you probably purchased the specialty versions for those practice areas. Now, I will tell you this. Every program comes with a very generic personal injury case intake form and a very generic divorce case intake form. Okay, we put these in every program so that people can see how they work. Okay, so they can just see the different things you can do with them. Okay, so if you see those, they're in all programs. All right, but every single person, every person who purchases Abacus always has this one intake option called new case. Okay, it's kind of like just a blanket intake form that you could use kind of for everything. Okay, and you have two versions of it. You have a plaintiff version and a defendant version. Okay, so if you look at those, okay, you can see, again, generic intake form. It's got a section here about the matter info, some generic questions about your client's personal info, and the opposing party's personal info. Okay? So first, you got to know what intake forms you have. So I invite all of you to do that. Second thing you need to do is once you look at the intake forms that you have, decide how you would want to tweak those intake forms to make them more in line with with what information you need to gather when you're taking on a new matter. Okay? A lot of you, if you've never used a technology like this before, you're probably using PDFs, maybe even Word docs that you're sending to your clients or that you're giving to your clients to have them give you basic information about their situation and their personal information, and you're using that to, do your data entry and things. So think about what questions are on those PDFs. Turn those into intake forms. You can do that. Okay? We can teach you how to customize your intake forms so that this layout on the intake form has all the appropriate fields that you need when you are taking on a new case. Okay? So that's the second thing you need to do. Okay, first thing is identify what you currently have. The second thing is decide how you would tweak that. Make a list. I really want my estate planning intake forms to have sections for property value, for husband's asset value, wife's asset value, things like that, right? Those are the things you want to start thinking about. What fields do I want on my intake form? Jot those down because that's step number 2. Okay? And then once you have that information, we can teach you how to customize these intake forms, okay? But they are usable enough right out of the box to where you should be able to get basic information about your case created efficiently so that you have records in place for your attorneys and your legal staff to start tracking time and start tracking productivity, okay? Because that's the main goal. We got to get records in our system to start tracking our productivity and to start tracking our billable hours. That's the key, okay? Now, once you have all the fields filled out in an intake form, you have some buttons down here at the bottom. Okay, now the big button here on the far right, create records and close, that's exactly what it does, okay? It takes all the information that you type, it creates all the records for that information, all the name records, and then the matter record and any note records. Okay, it creates all of those, it links them all together appropriately, and it closes out of the intake. Okay, the intake form is temporary. It is not there for you to go back and reference later on. It is a temporary tool for data entry. If you need to reference something about that case later on, then you just go into the case. Okay, you just open up that matters database, find the case, and open the record. Okay, so once you click that button that says create records and close, it does just that. Okay, if you need to save a draft because maybe it's just a long intake form because you've been tweaking it and things like that, or maybe it's one of those big PI intake forms. Let's say you got to take a break, you got to go to lunch, or you got to take a long phone call or a meeting. You can save a draft, okay, of the intake form and then come back and pick up where you left off. If you really want to keep a copy of the intake form just for your records, there's a print option. Okay, and then of course you could print a PDF, or if you're still keeping hard copies, paper copies in a filing cabinet, there's a print button. You can just print to your printer. Okay. Also, there's a timer. Look at that. What if this is a billable process? What if we actually bill for the time it takes to do this intake process? Well, when we open up our intake form, just start our timer. Okay, and that'll time the entire process that it takes us to fill in this information. And then it could potentially be a billable item, right? So once you click that create records and close button, it's going to do that. It's going to create all those records, link them all together, and it's going to close out. Okay, I'm just going to close out of my intake form totally, and we're back here to our main menu. And then, like I said, you need to reference information, after that about the case. You're going directly into the matter. Okay, you're going to go find that case record. You're going to open it up, and you're going to, take your notes here. You're going to make your edits to your fields within the actual record itself. All right. Okay, start thinking about those questions, folks. Let's see. I've got one in here that looks like it is specific to the intake form layout. So let me address that. It says, our intake forms do not have notes to add. Okay, well, remember, every intake form might be a little bit different. So what you're seeing on my screen may not be exactly the same as your intake form. Okay, but like I said, it is customizable. Okay, so if you don't have certain sections in here, or if you want to just kind of rearrange the sections, or you want to add a section for maybe like, witness number 1 or witness number 2, those are all things that you can do by using the intake form manager. Okay, notice my mouse trail there. File, setup, intake form manager. Okay, when you go into your intake form manager, you have the ability to customize all of your intake forms that you have in your system. Okay, we're not going to get into this today because this webinar does not cover the actual back end of customizing, but I will tell you this: if you go to AbacusNext.com/webinars and scroll down to the section that says past webinars, we have one that I did previously, not too long ago, that covers how to customize your intake forms. Okay, so go look at that. Again, that's AbacusNext.com/webinars. Scroll down to the section that says past webinars, and you can watch that webinar there. And we'll probably be doing it again in the future. So to the person that asked the question about not having a note section in your intake form, that's really not a big deal. You can add it yourself, okay? Just watch that webinar, or you can check the reference guide as well. And I think we have some videos on our main website under our resources section on our main website, AbacusNext.com, that talk about it as well. And then, of course, you can always schedule training with us, and we can sit with you one-on-one using GoToMeeting and teach you how to do it with your intake forms. If anybody's interested in that, just make sure you email training@AbacusNext.com, and we will get you scheduled. All right, let's look at some other questions here. Overall, when creating and entering all information in intake for a new matter, does all data automatically fill in under the litigation tab, case information, plaintiff information, defendant information, as well as opposing attorney. So this is a good question. Basically, what this person is asking is, when we fill in information in the intake form, where does it go? Okay, where does it go? Where it goes all depends on what your screens look like for your cases and for your contact records. So like, for instance, if I was using an intake form for, let's see, let's do, what's a simple one? Let me do one for, I'm looking for a specific one here, and I have so many, sometimes it's hard. We'll stick with PI. Let's just do PI. Okay, if I'm doing a personal injury intake, okay, and I get down to this little section here, after I get past all that matter information, and I get down to my section that says like plaintiff personal info, right? Plaintiff's insurance company info, defendant personal info, defendant insurance company info. When I fill all this in and I create the records and close, what's happening with that is it is all merging into my matter record for that specific matter, okay? So depending upon what your matter screen looks like, that is going to determine how you view it in that matter. So I'll pull up a personal injury screen. This is my personal injury screen. And you can see on my personal injury screen, I have a section right on the main tab, which some people, if you have the litigation specialty version, that's called the litigation tab, which is why Lonnie, in the question there, referred to the tab as the litigation tab. Or I'm sorry, there's another tab here called litigation, my mistake. So the information that you put in the intake form, depending upon the matter screen layout, it varies where it's going to go. So you can see here, my client information shows right here on the main accident tab, as well as on the linked names tab. Okay, see how it shows my client here, and it also shows my client info here. Okay, so if I had and here's another example, right? My list of defendants. My intake form for personal injury allowed me to enter up to 5 different defendants. So there was only one that was entered for this matter, Gene Schaefer. Okay, so I only see Gene Schaefer. I see Gene Schaefer here on my main screen. And then also if I go to link names, I see Gene Schaefer here as well. Okay, listed as a defendant. Okay, your screen may have, a section for, identifiable information on the litigation tab if you have that. Again, it kind of just depends on, your screens and what screens you have. Okay, like here's a section for the judge. So if I had a section in my intake form for the judge's information, well, then it would show right here, right? It would show the judge's name, and also on my linked names tab, I would see, the judge's information as well. So Lonnie, in regards to your question, it kind of depends on what your matter screen looks like. All right. So remember I said you need to determine how you would want to tweak your intake forms, right? How you would want to edit them. Well, the same kind of holds true for your case screens as well, right? Because it does no good to have a field on an intake form for accident address if you don't have a field for accident address in your matter record, right? It does you no good. So make sure, if you have important fields on your intake form, make sure you also have those fields on your matter screen as well. Good question, Lonnie. Let's see here. My intake form for new cases has the notes field, but it always makes me add a note before I close, even if I don't have a note. Interesting. It shouldn't be doing that for the note screen. So I almost wonder if maybe it's doing it because of something else. And Jessica, I see that as a question from you, and you and I will discuss that offline when we have our other conversation. So I'll have to take a look at that, in other words, and just see how it's reacting, because it should not be doing it. The only time you should ever get a requirement to fill in information on an intake form is obviously the client section has to be filled in. And I believe you also have to have a zip code in there for the client. You don't have to have the address, the phone number, but you do have to have a name and a zip code. So if you don't put that in, it will bark at you and tell you need to put something in there. And also you have to have a matter name. Okay? You have to have a name of your case. Okay, so I believe those are by default. I think those are the only required. That doesn't mean that, you know, if you have a specialty version, there may be other required fields. It just depends. Okay. So when you get a pop-up like that, you know, a required field pop-up, really make sure you're reading exactly what it's saying, because usually they're pretty descriptive about what needs to be done. Let's see. Okay. Let me just scroll down a little bit. Sorry, I'm viewing these questions on a smaller monitor. Let's see here. Okay. Okay, Lonnie, it looks like you were just doing some follow-up there to your previous question. It looks like you're understanding correctly, so thank you for responding there. Any other questions from anyone? I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything here. I think that's all of the questions. I'll just wait another minute here in case anything pops into your heads there and you want to ask. And while people are thinking, you know, a lot of times questions come while you're actually doing things, and we understand that. So make sure if you ever have a question about any of the Abacus Next products that you use, make sure you email training@abacusnext.com. Okay, if it's something we can solve for you, you know, over email, we do that. If it's something that's a little bit more involved, we'll set up a little go-to-meeting session and we'll get you squared away. If it's something that falls under, you know, more of a, you know, actual official training session type of deal, we'll help you get that scheduled as well so that we can carve out, you know, an hour to really, you know, have a complete training on a topic. The best way to learn is to really get in there and try it yourself. That really is the best way. So don't be scared to use the intake section to create what I always call a, you know, a dummy case, basically is what it is, right? Just call it like test v test or something, right? And create, you know, Johnny Test or something as the client and test it out, you know? And you can delete it, you know, when you're done because you know it's not real. So that's really the best way to learn. Let's see. Yeah, so I'm going to put in the little chat box here. I'm just going to put the email address for everybody. So this is going into the chat box, by the way, not the question box. So just check your chat there. If you use training@abacusnext.com, that is the email the email address to use to, you know, anything knowledge related, okay, anything training related. Okay. Also, if you have any webinar ideas, like if you have some topics maybe you'd like us to do a free webinar on, please email webinar. I believe it's webinars@abacusnext.com. Webinars@abacusnext.com. Okay, that's a good one too. Okay, let me look at another question here. If I am working in a personal injury specialty version intake and I get a phone call, so I have to go look for a client, would I just have to press on save draft? Yeah, yes, that's, you know, well, it kind of depends. If you're in an intake form, really any intake form, you can open up the name window on top of it. You know, if somebody calls and you gotta, you know, do that, it's not going to, you know, hurt anything that you've typed in previously. Now, the one thing you may want to just keep in mind is if you are timing that intake process, you'll probably want to pause the timer maybe if you're not going to be, you know, actually doing that data entry because you're working on another task. You know, I guess that's up to you. But no, if you just to get to a different window in the system, you don't need to click Save Draft. The only time you really need to click Save Draft is if you think you're going to have to close out of this. Okay, because if you're going to have to close this window, it's going to close out. It's going to ask you if you want to save, if you've actually done some data entry. And then at that point, you can say, yes, save it, right? And then it'll let you give it like a draft name and stuff like that. So just to access another, window in the Abacus system, no, you don't need to save a draft. But if you think if you're going to walk away from your desk or something, save a draft, because, I mean, come on, you get a power outage or something, and those PI intake forms can be long, and it would be bad if you did 90% of it and then your computer crashed and you couldn't recover it, so you had to retype it. So kind of use the same saving philosophy that you would use back in school if you were doing like a report, a long paper. Save as much as possible, because you don't want to have to redo that work. Okay, let's see if we got any other questions in here. Not seeing anything so far. Let's give it another minute. Oh, sure. So here's a question. It just says, can you explain again what the Create Records and Close tab is? Absolutely. And this is actually not, this confusion is not uncommon. I find this a lot in my training sessions, and it's warranted. People always think, they see save and they say, oh, well, that's how I save my intake form, right? Well, that's how you save a draft of your intake form. To actually create the records, okay, the name records and the matter records for your database that you're going to be logging, productivity and time in, you need to use the button in the bottom right corner, which says Create Records and Close, okay? Because that button is what's going to take all the information in this intake form, and it's going to, use that to create all your name records, your matter record, and link them all together, okay? So that your client is linked as client to your case, witness number 1 is linked as a witness to your case, Dr. So-and-so is linked as the expert witness to your case, so on and so forth, okay? And then the close portion of that just means that after it does that record creation, it's going to close this intake window, okay? It's going to close it out. It goes away. So that is what that button means, rather. Any other questions? So here's a question that says, can you show us the steps where you open a new matter and a new case? I'm not sure I fully understand that. If you could clarify, because those technically are the same thing. So I'm not fully sure what you mean by that. So please just clarify, and I will look to the question box for that clarification. Okay, a group and a name. Again, I'm sorry. I guess I'm not fully understanding what you mean by a group and a name. So again, Jessica, I can follow up with you offline on the phone, and we can talk about that. But remember, there was what I described in this session, right? When it comes to the workflows, was you had the old workflow, right, where you went into the names database and you clicked add, and you repeated that process to add all the name records, right? And then you went into the matters database and you added the case record, okay, aka the matter record, and then you linked them all together manually. We want to move you away from that. We don't want you to do that process. We want you to use the intake form to create the matter record and all of the name records, at least in the beginning, that are associated with your case. Is there a maximum number of names you can link? No, there is not. You can link as many names as you want. And if you're asking that because my program barked at me about the maximum name, it's just because my program is unregistered. And if your program is unregistered, then there is a maximum. But all of your programs are not unregistered. They are registered fine. So you can link as many people as you want. Any other questions out there? Okay, I'm not seeing anything else. So for those people that I said I would follow up with, I will do that. And again, if you have any questions or anything pops up while you're working through this process, email training@abacusnext.com, and we will get you squared away. I hope you guys are coming to our user conference in Las Vegas. It's the 24th through the 26th at Caesar's Palace. If you are not coming or you'd like to, head over to AbacusMaximus.com, and you can see all the details and get your tickets and all that good stuff. It's a great excuse to take a work trip to Vegas, and you get all of your CLE credits as well, or at least, we are doing CLE credits, so they apply to me. Let's see, one last question here came in right at the last second. What intake form do you use at the beginning? It depends on the type of case. So when you click your intake button, okay, you need to decide, what type of case is this potentially? Is this a car accident case? Is this a divorce case? Because that's going to determine what intake form you're going to use. If you don't have, case type specific intake forms, then you're probably just going to use this one here that says new case, either client plaintiff or client defendant. Okay. Now, if it isn't a litigation matter, then just ignore the fact that it says plaintiff and defendant. Okay. If you're just doing some estate planning for somebody, you can still use either one of these intake forms. It doesn't matter. Still use it. Okay. And then also the follow-up to that was, how about in a motor vehicle accident case? In a motor vehicle accident case, assuming that you have the personal injury specialty version, which if you are a PI law firm, you should have it, by the way. Okay, PI is just extremely involved when it comes to the type of data that goes into it. Plus, a lot of times you're billing insurance companies. So I would recommend adding on the personal injury specialty version to your Abacus program. I think it's literally like $20 a month. So it's very, very cost efficient and cost effective. So the PI specialty version intake forms, there is one specific for vehicle accidents. Okay. And that vehicle accident intake form, as I showed previously, is very detailed, where you can put in all kinds of info. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there. If any other questions pop up, or if I didn't get to something, I will follow up with you, or if something comes up, just email training@abacusnext.com. Thank you so much for your attention. We'll be sending out the recording and posting it on our website. Remember, abacusnext.com/webinars. Scroll down to the section that says past webinars, and you can view all of our previous webinars for free. Thank you so much. Have a great day. We'll talk to you again soon.